All right, so now to get through 90 frames, right, I'm not getting to my equilibrium state. So I have one of two options, right? I can ask for more frames, but I'd have to coordinate this and this together, or I can ask for more sub-iterations. So let's go back to 10 and see what that gets us. All right, at 10, it looks like we go all the way to equilibrium, right? So we can scrub through, right? So this allows us to essentially have a timeline. This slider is our timeline, so we can go to a specific frame, and then we can see what's happening there, and we can then use this to animate what we see and send that out to video. All right. So I'm going to give myself a few more frames. I'm going to say 4 seconds, 120 frames, but I'm going to leave it at sub-iteration 10. Make sure I change my current frame to 0 to 119. So I want to see more of that plateau when it starts to relax. There we go. That looks pretty good. All right. So again, to recap, what we're doing here is calculating all of the frames within a specific range, and then we can scrub through them with this slider acting as our timeline to visualize by this list manipulation only the current frame that we've asked for from this slider. All right, so now what we can do is compose a view, right? Turn what we want on or off, right? So it's going to look kind of like this at our end state. I'm going to compose my view, zoom in a little bit, something like that, right? Then, and of course you can make a gradient background. You can change the properties of your viewport so it looks different. I'm going to leave my gradient background because I like it. Then we're going to right-click the current frame and say Animate. Right? This brings up a new window, and I want to make sure that I save this in a specific location and as a PNG. Make sure that this does not say JPEG. We want to save as a PNG. We found this to be the most versatile file type for using in Adobe or Photoshop or After Effects, etc. And you can use transparencies with PNGs. All right, so we're going to use that. We're going to say that it should go. I'll save it to my desktop in a new folder called Computing Form Animation 1. Hit OK. And this will be CP-Animation01. This will be filled out in with the frame number. Perspective is the view I want to capture. The resolution, I'm going to say something more like 720 by 360. So just make sure that everything is fitting within that resolution. Maybe I'll go a little bit bigger. All right, so there's a little bit of breathing room. How many frames? Well, I said I wanted 120, right? So I'm going to use that same value of 120 frames. And if you want to include a tag or not, right, that will be a tag that shows you what frame you're in here at the bottom. I'm going to turn it off for now. What's going to happen whenever I hit OK is that this slider is going to move through each one of its values based on this division. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then capture the current screen grab from Rhino and save it into this folder. So I'm going to hit OK. It's generating the frames and capturing it, showing us where it's being saved to. Save, 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 save. All right, now it's done. All right, so before we go any further, I'll save this. I'll make sure that I save this as a base file. Now, let's go to where we saved those animation frames at. All right, so here are all the frames, right, as individual PNGs, so you can use them individually if you want. I'm going to open them in Bridge. All right, so Bridge allows me to see them a little bit easier. I can hit spacebar and kind of move through them with my arrow keys to get a sense of what it's going to look like. Right? And then I can also select all of them and say Tools, Photoshop, Load Files into Photoshop Layers. So this is going to launch Photoshop for me, and each one of my frames is now going to become a layer. So this is populating all of my layers. With 120, it's going to take a couple seconds to get them all in there. Almost there. So we're going to use Photoshop as a way to turn each one of these layers into a frame that will be a part of our GIF. All right? So typically this is probably the workspace that you'll see when you open up your Photoshop. We want to make sure that we have under Window, open up the timeline window so that we see here what we can fill in as a timeline, right? So I'm going to select all of my layers and drag them. No. I'm going to say make frames from layers. There it is. Make frames from layers. So it's going to pull all those layers in. I can preview how this looks. And it actually looks like it's going the opposite way. So what we can do here under this menu is to reverse the frames. All right, so now it's going the correct way. It all looks good to me. And right now it's assuming that each one of these is 1 frame, so 30 frames per second. So it says 0 seconds. That's fine. You can manipulate these here, but we've already set it up very specifically, so let's leave it like this. All right, and then we're going to do File, Save for Web. We're going to use the GIF option. And I don't really need to change anything except for the fact that you have an option here. Do you want to loop the GIF or not? I'll just say that it can loop forever. I don't want to change the size because I've already been specific about that. And then I'm going to save. I'll save it in that same folder that I was working on. It's going to process that. Save it. And there it is. If I open it in an Explorer window, we can see the GIF. All right. So now we've made one animation. All right, so to recap, the process was that we animated the slider here, current frame, specified how many frames we want, what the size was, where it would be saved. Each frame, if we hit OK, will be saved out to this corresponding folder. We then took those frames and brought them into Photoshop through Bridge, specifying that each file should be a Photoshop layer. Then in Photoshop, we brought all of those layers into our timeline and then did File, Save for Web, specifying GIF. All right? Okay, so this, in the kind of key thing that we changed in terms of the controls here was that instead of asking for just the current frame, we asked for a certain number of frames to be solved. Then we have to step through each frame after the simulation, right? In terms of going further with where you can go with animation,